Hello and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for February 13th, 2023. My name is Tom Luongo and we have a lot to talk about. I'm very excited today for episode 133 to have Danielle Dimartino Booth, chief strategist over at Quill Intelligence and former assistant to Dallas Fed Chair Richard Fisher on the show. There was nobody else I wanted to talk to about this very interesting moment in time with Fed policy than her. So Danielle, welcome to the show and thank you very much for taking the time.
I'm really happy to be here. This is a subject I know a few things about.
I'm certainly hoping so. So I was listening to your book the other day. I was on my way down to do a hockey game down in Tampa with a friend of mine, and so I was listening to your book to get some insight on this. And I was shocked by your description of the culture within the Fed being very hidebound. And I've worked in academia, so as a chemist formerly, and so I have some experience with that. So to start out with, because I think personnel is policy, I was wondering if you wanted to, update what you think may have changed culturally within the Fed under Powell's leadership, who comes from a private sector background, as opposed to the academics of Bernanke and Yellen, who clearly are not cut from the same cloth as Jay Powell.
So if I had to venture, and from what I've heard, the culture hasn't changed as much as the leadership has. Mm-hmm. There's a high probability that the staff at the Federal Reserve Board and throughout the system, throughout the 12 districts, that they were responsible in large part for pressing with this transitory narrative that inflation was going to be transitory in nature. It was going to be. They weren't focused on the fact that the transmission mechanism of monetary policy had changed. Instead of using the banking system as a conduit to make loans, to assess creditworthiness, the Fed had just monetized money that was then directly deposited into the checking accounts of American consumers. Mm-hmm. It obviously sparked inflation that was not transitory in nature, if you're measuring transitory in a matter of months. Mm-hmm. And yet, I think the staff probably failed to see, because academics sometimes have issues with vision. I think the staff failed to see that changing the transmission mechanism was critical. It was a critical change element that they didn't incorporate into their models. They insisted that inflation was going to be transitory. It ended up leaving a lot of egg on Chair Powell's face.
Agreed.
That he took the guidance of his staff. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the shift in his tone and mannerisms that have followed reflect a man who is looking outside of the organization right now for direction, for monitoring, for intelligence, as well as, he's not going to alienate the entire staff, but there was also a massive power struggle that took place that shouldn't have. I put that on the Biden administration. I would have put it on any administration, whether it was Democrat or Republican.
Sure.
Any administration that dragged its feet for as long as it did, you're going to end up creating a crisis of confidence, a leadership vacuum at the helm of the most important central bank in the world. And that is indeed what took place between when the Biden administration was pitting Lael Brainerd against Jay Powell for a very long time.
Yeah.
So it's not really an office that you leave vacant technically for months and months on end. Please leave a message for the chair. It's not how it works. Right. And yet that is exactly what happened. So I think we need to look at a chastened Jay Powell and a man who he's wearing more of his lawyer hat from his past life now, and trying to get in all sorts of viewpoints, not just what I called in my book, Fed Up, group stink, and being surrounded by people who all think the same way.
Well, it's the interesting part about it, because I was watching that same political fight at the same time you were. I remember listening to a number of interviews you did where you were saying the same thing. And I attribute a lot of what the Biden administration did to malice as opposed to anything else. But and it's interesting that Lael Brainerd is now talking about wanting to leave the Fed and go to Treasury. And one thing that popped up while I was listening to your book, which was that the structure of the Fed has the chairman of the New York Fed in this case, John Williams, correct?
Mhm.
Supposedly is supposed to be the vice chair, but yet after the meeting between Biden, Powell, and Brainerd, which effectively said, okay, where Biden said, I'll renominate Jay Powell, the deal was that Brainerd was supposed to become vice chair. Did that ever happen?
She is vice chair. There are two vice chairs.
Okay.
Actually, there are more than two vice chairs, but there are two vice chairs that are who are considered to be power seats. There's this triumvirate at the top of the Fed, so that by law, the president of the New York Fed has a permanent vote.
Right.
That's as opposed to Chicago and Cleveland. They vote every other year. And that's just a reflection of what the U.S. economy was in 1913, that Cleveland and Chicago, after New York, were ascribed to be the most powerful regional economies in the country. Of course, that's no longer the case today.
Right.
And then the other 9 district presidents, they rotate in every third year to vote on the FOMC. And that's really, we don't sit around today in 2023 versus 2022 saying, oh, did you see what Jim Bullard said?
Right.
Because Jim Bullard was voting in 2022. He's not voting in 2023.
Right.
So he can say what he wants, but he doesn't have a vote. It makes a huge difference. John Williams, again, he is the vice chair of the Federal Open Market Committee. If Jay Powell gets run over by a train, he runs the Federal Open Market Committee that decides interest rate policy. The Federal Reserve Board has its own meetings that do not necessarily entail the entire Federal Open Market Committee. They make decisions that are based on other things that do not involve the district banks. Lael Brainerd is vice chair of the Federal Reserve Board.
Okay.
So if Jay Powell gets run over by a train, she runs Federal Reserve Board meetings. So, but the three of these individuals collectively are considered to be the main power structure within the Fed. What's curious, since you raised John Williams' name, is he was kind of Yellen's protege.
Right.
So it's been quite fascinating to watch Williams stay very loyal to Powell in deference to his own typically dovish leanings. So this is a very politicized Fed when you see allegiances that actually betray philosophies.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing with John Williams. He's typically dovish. He has held the hawkish line for Powell, and that would be against Brainerd, by the way.
Right. And Yellen at Treasury.
And Yellen at Treasury. Very importantly, because last week, Jay Powell was asked point blank, there are things that the Federal Reserve can do. You were involved in those discussions, Jay Powell, in order to mitigate some of the potential fallout if there's really a debt ceiling showdown and we get all the way into summer with no resolution. And Jay Powell said, don't call me. I'm not lifting a finger.
Right.
So again, a very politically charged environment right now.
Well, and one of the things that we do here I do here at Gold, Goods and Guns is I look at the intersection of geopolitics and markets, and because these markets are so politicized, it's really very difficult to look at data that's not politically charged. And so to me, these things are very, very interesting and very, very powerful. So, and I've been watching the Fed and the moves that Powell's made, and Williams and Yellen, and trying to figure out, honestly, who they work for. But I'll leave a lot of that aside. I'll leave that on the cutting room floor. You don't have to comment if you don't want to.
Well, no, I mean, the only thing I would say was that it's not that sexy.
Okay.
It's not. They really are, at the end of the day, bureaucrats given lots of power.
Right.
And people need to understand that there's no Rothschild in the background pulling strings and all. It sounds so good. I understand that. It's so hot and sexy. I get that. It's just not the case. And Powell especially knows how to operate as a bureaucrat amongst powerful bankers. People forget that when Salomon Brothers ran into this massive scandal years ago in the Treasury market, that it was Undersecretary of the Treasury, Jerome Powell, who brokered a deal with Warren Buffett.
Right.
And so he understands how to be an effective bureaucrat. but that really is what he is. And the man's net worth is 125, 150 million.
Right.
He certainly has no reason to be controlled by anybody because he controls himself. He can go play golf at the Chevy Chase Country Club. So
right.
he can do whatever he wants.
Right.
But I think he thinks he's serving his country.
But that's what I have also kind of from a different perspective concluded about Powell, that it seems to me that he's trying to take control of U.S. monetary policy and take it back from what I would honestly say are people that have a more globalist nature. You've got, I look at the Bernanke and Yellen Feds as doing the bidding of the world in the offshore dollar markets more than the onshore dollar markets. And because of that, and I think there's shift under Powell is coming back.
And that's just a reflection of Bernanke and Yellen's naivete and their lack of market acumen, because they were easier. It was easier for them to be puppets because of their lack of understanding, because they were pure academics.
Right.
And that's why sometimes when you see them, when you listen to them, Bernanke and Yellen, they seem like they're so blind to the reality that surrounds them. And I think that's frighteningly genuine.
Okay. Yeah, that is right. That is frightening. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, because I'm thinking purely now in terms of like monetary, what's the word I'm looking for? Dogma. So we know that Yellen, for example, and Bernanke both are doctrinaire Keynesians, and the Fed itself is a Keynesian institution. So it has two tools, right? It's got the manipulation of short-term interest rates, and it's got the ability to manipulate the money supply. But rates are really a demand-side tool, right? As a Keynesian institution, Keynesians are absolutely obsessed with aggregate demand. They don't really care about aggregate supply because, well, supply will just take care of itself. It's a hand-waving argument. I don't agree with it. Personally, I'm an Austro-libertarian, so I look at all this and I go, yeah, okay, that's nice, but whatever. So since rates are a demand-side tool, they can't help with cost-push inflation, and that's what we've had. We had a massive pump and dump in commodities. We had massive disruptions of supply chains coming out of COVID, and that's not a problem you solve with raising interest rates. So if that's our problem, then this is what has led me into where I've gone, which is then why is Powell raising rates as aggressively as he is? And is there some other dimension to this?
Well, and I've been on the record for almost a year now in saying that he would like to put monetary policy making back in the hands of the Federal Reserve. And that means that you break this dysfunctional relationship between the financial markets and the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very difficult to do. Wall Street has been making policy for generations now. Right. Greenspan was in awe of being the savior of the stock market. And that's, Sebastian Malady in the biography he wrote about Greenspan said Greenspan was like, dude, I was unpopular in high school. This is so awesome. I am so popular now. Because Greenspan was a little bit savvier, if you will, than Yellen and Bernanke, and yet he was just struck by the limelight. And but he did indeed, because he was so mesmerized with his own persona, he ended up slowly giving away control of monetary policy to Wall Street.
Yeah,
this was the birth of the Fed put. If Powell's trying to break the Fed put, then you have to convincingly get rates off of the zero bound. Right. You have to not just say, but show that you're not going to facilitate malinvestment, which is a word that you would love.
I agree completely.
I'm looking up at my ceiling. I've got a poster of von Mises. You understand exactly what I'm saying. So, and you have to keep rates there.
Right.
And
okay.
The reason let's just say he doesn't want to go back to the zero bound. Let's just say he wants to go to 2% instead, if need be, at some point. That'd be great. Raise the floor.
Right.
But now he's slowing down on the magnitude of the rate hikes, but he's not stopping. So as long as he doesn't stop, then he can keep shrinking that balance sheet. which he always wanted to do. In 2012, in 2013, in 2014, when he was a rookie on the Federal Reserve Board, he kept saying, we're not going to be able to exit this policy. We're not going to be able to normalize the size of the balance sheet if we keep going willy-nilly.
Right.
Long as he keeps rates at a certain high level, he can keep unwinding that balance sheet.
Yeah, I agreed completely, and it is a typical criticism of the Fed can't unwind their balance sheet. They can't go to 6. They can't go to 4% or 5% or whatever. It'll cause a complete collapse. And speaking of that, we now have an historic 210 inversion on the yield curve, right? So the markets are screaming policy mistake. How can Powell do this? And tomorrow we have the CPI, but projections are the CPI are going to vindicate Powell here. And that the markets are in effect kind of wrong, that because we're also getting good enough economic data coming out of the US. Not great economic data. I'm not a big fan. I think we have stagflation personally, but good enough that GDP is not going to print negative because they're spending money in a way that makes drunken sailors blush in Washington. There's a whole lot of credit that was created, 4 times the 5-year run rate in 2022. That money's still floating through the domestic markets. It's the international markets where credit is mostly being pulled back on by Powell's raising interest rates, because he's raised the cost of offshore credit as termed in dollars, which is what I've become more and more focused on. So I got to wonder if we get what happens tomorrow with the CPI. And if the markets are finally beginning to wake up to the fact that Powell hasn't made a policy mistake, do you think the 210 inversion is going to narrow?
Powell has knowingly made a policy mistake. And they increased the weight of shelter by 1 full percentage point. And shelter is the most lagging of all drivers of the consumer price index. So by changing the weights within the CPI, the first print of which we will see tomorrow, they basically ensured a hotter print than we would have gotten otherwise. So that's A. So it's not so much that inflation's not ebbing; it is.
Right.
It's going to take some time because of the composition of consumer prices. You've already seen, for example, fertilizer prices come crashing down. That means food's following. It's pretty simple, people.
Right.
And there is this kind of facade of great, stronger than expected U.S. output. The consumer is strong. Well, there's a lot of credit card spending going on, but everybody knows that. What fewer people talk about, and what I've written about extensively at Quill Intelligence, is this, you hear getrefunds.com on the radio. There is this cottage industry that's crept up to claw back up to $26,000 per employee of payroll taxes. And I will contextualize the import of this loophole that was extended with the third and final stimulus check that was sent out when Biden had the first stimulus package, which is the only one, by the way, that matters. You can talk about people in Washington, D.C. spending money like drunken sailors. If it's going to be deployed the same way old pork belly money was deployed inefficiently and effectively, it's not going to do anything for inflation at all. It's going to do a lot in terms of raising the public debt and inefficiently spending our money. But as taxpayers, we're used to that. That's the only thing we've ever known is inefficient allocation of resources on the part of Congress. But the loophole that they put in. So the CARES Act, the first time that you could kind of take advantage of clawing back taxes came with the CARES Act. So that was passed in April. The first time that companies were filing those quarterly taxes was like July of 2020. So in the 31 months since July of 2020, I'm going to keep this very simple. The United States government has paid out $343 billion in business income tax refunds. In the 31 months that preceded July of 2020, they paid out about $174 billion. So a really nice slush fund for the wealthy was extended by Biden. There's a certain irony there. And in December, there was about $24 billion of these business income tax refunds, the second highest month on record. In January, $19.5 billion was pumped into the economy, again, to the wealthiest. My biggest tell is I've flown 150,000 some odd 450,000 miles, excuse me, loyalty points for American Airlines this year.
Mm-hmm.
I get upgraded a lot, but I don't get upgraded as much as I used to, because when you put this much money into the hands of the top 10% of earners who own companies, who can claw back these payroll taxes, the wife, the kids, they're all flying in first class, cash. And if you look at where spending has been the strongest, airfares, hotels, recreation, it's this additional, call it $20 billion a month, when Americans spend about $175 billion a month. It's a big pickup.
Yeah, it is.
And nobody talks about this.
Oh, nice. I hadn't even considered that. My head is so in the geopolitical picture that I don't look at data like this. So that's really great. Thank you. I appreciate that. It is interesting. And so the I just don't see the CPI. The GDP number like collapsing until later in the year, if not until Q4. I mean,
it's really hard to say, because the industrial sector is definitely in recession.
Yeah.
There are a few people who would dispute that. People bought a lot of goods. There was a last push. If you look at industrial production, net of motor vehicles, it's been in recession for a long time. So all we're witnessing with industrial production not being as weak as it would be otherwise is just semiconductors arriving finally and being put into Ford 150s, F-150s. That's it. All we're seeing is the ring. But as far as car delinquencies, auto repossessions, all of these things point to, as soon as we get through income tax refund season and people have their last bit of cash from Uncle Sam and they spend it, they go put a down payment on an overpriced used car. The other side of that's not going to be pretty.
No, it's not. In no way, manner, shape, or form am I not saying that 2024 is not going to be ugly. And again, I'm also strictly speaking about the technical definition of a recession. There's no real growth here. Like there's, under no circumstances are we talking real growth, real positive interest rates. We finally have something even close to a real positive rate on the 2-year versus the PCE deflator. And everybody's talking about, hey, the Fed should pivot and go back to the zero bound. I'm like, what are you out of your mind? Like we just finally got something. I don't know about you, but my passbook savings account only pays 0.15%. Ain't paying 4%.
Well, that's why we're in the process of moving all of our money.
Exactly.
into savings accounts that pay 4.5%, 5%.
Right. And if you want, there's like CDs, 9-month CDs are paying like 3.5 here locally and things like that. So it's not as bad as I just painted it, but just on basic everyday, unsecured, bail-inable savings accounts.
My 3 teenagers go to high school at a military academy in Indiana. I keep pumping I've never even heard of them until I went on bankrate.com and said highest CD rates in the country. And, there's the First Internet Bank of Indiana, FDIC insured, paying 5%. I'm like, done.
Yeah. Nice. Not my credit union. My credit union is going, yeah, no.
That's the beauty of America. You can put your money wherever you want.
That's true.
FDIC insured, you can go shopping on the internet.
I agreed. Okay, so I want to shift gears because again, this is my gig on my gig looking at the global market picture, because I think that there's a lot of things happening around the world that the Fed has to deal with. Right, there's de-dollarization. There's all sorts of stuff that they have to deal with in terms of the international flow of dollars. And I wanted to look at the euro dollar markets real quick because I tweeted something out. I tweeted the euro dollar futures curve out the other day, and I think you retweeted it, and I appreciated that. And I wanted to say I want to tackle that. So. Jeff Snyder argues that the euro dollars are beyond the Fed's control. But when I think about global dollar flow, and I really think about what the Fed's gross powers are. All right. My partner Dexter White was talking about this. And he said, if you think about the Fed, its powers are not necessarily symmetrical, even though we kind of believe that they are. Like their ability to print money and take money away are symmetrical. They're equal in power. With the advent of over the last 50 years of the euro dollar offshore shadow banking system, I don't think those two systems are symmetrical. Those powers are symmetrical. If you really think about it, it's like the Fed is, if they're at the zero bound, they're just another euro dollar producer. They're no different than Credit Agricole or Deutsche Bank or whomever. But when they're pulling money out of the system, because no one has the ability to raise the cost of credit, because all those euro dollars are credit dollars, right? Does the Fed, no one has power like that. And that is, I think, one of those things that when you listen to the squawking, right, that has been going on about Powell raising rates,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that sounds like a whole bunch of people overseas. That's where the end of the Fed put really exists. And I wanted you to like really think about that.
I mean,
talk about that.
Think back to the weekend before the Fed pushed through its first 75 basis point rate hike.
Mm-hmm.
Who was losing her mind? Christine Lagarde. She was publicly approaching the Fed in the media saying, you can't do this. No, you can have rodents of unusually large size in The Princess Bride. You cannot deploy rate hikes of unusually large size and not blow something up. Over this last weekend, Bloomberg was running a big headline. The IMF is in the process of a second big round of bailouts of these emerging markets economies. Of course, the IMF is still busy.
Right.
I mean, every single January, it's like it's time to pile into emerging markets, and I'm like, I don't think money's cheap yet for you to be making these proclamations. No. It's just not. And people do not understand. I get that Janet Yellen is depleting the Treasury general account because she's allowed to, because she's deploying emergency measures. I get that. I get that C&I lending has, commercial and industrial loan has increased. It did so in 2008. It did so right as the pandemic was hitting. As companies panic grabbed their credit lines. Mm-hmm. As they well should have. But we just saw on the Fed senior loan officer survey, that gravy train's pulling out of the station. Mm-hmm. Lending standards are tightening across the board, whether it's commercial and industrial, commercial real estate, residential real estate, autos, credit cards, across the board.
Yep.
So, and QT just quietly churns on in the background, pulling liquidity out of the global financial system. And that is meaningful. And it makes my head explode when Michael Hartnett at Bank of America, he puts out great graphs every Thursday night in the Flow Show. Mm-hmm. He put out one on Thursday night that showed that everything taken together, the reverse repo facility, lending, TGA, everything, add it all up, we're still seeing now negative liquidity net. That hurts.
Yeah, no. And now the big question is, and I've noticed the reverse repo facility is down to just over $2 trillion, down from a high of about 2.5. But that money is going to flow. That's domestic. Those are effectively domestic reserves. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's money markets. It's the First Internet Bank of Indiana. Right. It's people pulling money out of Bank of America and putting money into a money market fund that's paying them actual yield.
Cool. That's a good thing.
And the money market fund is, yes, very rationally saying, there's not enough T-bill supply out there, whatever. I'm just going to go park it at the Fed.
Right.
Fine.
Yep. So, yeah. So when I look at when I think about this, it's very clear to me that, yes, that Lagarde has been screaming about Powell since June of 2021, when they went to the Green Shores Summit or whatever, the Green Seas Summit. And she made the note that, we now all have to coordinate global monetary policy to fight climate change. And Jay Powell was like the guy in Life of Brian going, I'm not. We're all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals. I'm not. I have a dual mandate, and it's domestically focused. And then he creates the reverse repo facility, quote unquote, nightmare. And to me, it seemed like the right thing to do, because he broke the euro bull market overnight, finally defended the dollar, and started this process, right? Like overnight, I don't know if you remember, but the euro dropped 3 cents in 48 hours. And we had a similar moment like a week and a half ago on the jobs print. Like the Fed comes out on Wednesday, only raises 25 basis points. Everybody screams the Fed pivoted. Lagarde comes out and says, well, we're going to start doing corporate QE for ESG bonds now. That translates to BlackRock's in trouble. Deutsche Bank's in trouble. And then on Friday, the jobs number comes out. You can argue whether it's fictitious or not. You can attenuate that to taste. That's fine. And then the market completely collapses and goes, oh, no. And I've noticed the Eurodollar futures market today is down another 5 basis points across the board from the pivot the inversion is now between June and September, not between March and June. And by the end of the month, I think it's going to be between September and December. It's now that spread's only down to 18 basis points, and it was screaming 50 basis points like a month ago.
Well, and you've heard the Republicans saying, Janet Yellen is saying June. The GOP is saying maybe as far as October. Let's wait and see what happens. It's like, come on. As long as the Treasury is not out there flooding the market with bill issuance, this probably can keep going.
Yep.
It just can't. I mean, obviously these are domestic forces, but they're very globally influential.
Yeah, no, I'm what I'm most worried about, or more than anything else right now, is that I look at the CARES Act as nothing more than a bunch of globalist blackmail to force the Fed to monetize trillions of dollars of debt that Jerome Powell had no desire to get back on that train with. And he was forced to, because the CARES Act, because Congress spent the money and Trump signed it, and that was that. And now he had to deal with it because, the primary dealers can't say no. They're going to, like, the whole process is automatic, right? So here we are. What's on the table now is if those forces are still existent, how do they get Powell to monetize another, I don't know, $5 trillion, $10 trillion, pick a number, right? Well, you take us to war in Ukraine.
Like, I mean, of course, that will not happen with a McCarthy House of Representatives.
We hope.
It's just, let me put it differently. It's not happening in 2023. They want their pound of flesh. The GOP wants its pound of flesh after the first 2 years of the Democrats running the House and the Senate. And the far right contingency has already, McCarthy, do you want a 16th vote?
Right.
They've already proven that they're going to stand in the way of anything crazy. And the credit rating agencies have both come out and said, the two that did not downgrade the debt of the United States in August of 2011, both credit rating agencies have come out and said, listen, we're going to be paying attention to whether or not, unlike 2011, it was really dramatic. The markets fell out of bed. Things got very ugly, but you still didn't address entitlement spending. So you're still not addressing the long-term fiscal health of the United States. You are on watch. Yes. This GOP, I think, is, and it's not because they're good people. Politicians are not good people, but they hope to make a point because it looks good of saying we're forcing the country to address its long-term fiscal spending, entitlement spending, whatever you want to call it, so that we can maintain dollar reserve currency status and be king of the world. So if even if it's just playing politics,
yes,
and trying to create optics going into a presidential election year, that's going to be very meaningful because that means that the Fed's not going to have to monetize squat.
That's what I'm hoping for. And I watched this play out. So I'm looking for those moments where someone shifts sides or someone does something they're not supposed to. I watch Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema in the Senate very closely. I'm watching Matt Gaetz really carefully right now because he controls what he said the other day was that there are the number of members of Congress that are against any further funding of Ukraine has risen from 3 previous to the new Congress to 70. 70. That's a big contingent. That's enough of a contingent to block anything. Right. And then, of course, but it's like everything else, I'm a little Missouri about this. Show me, talk is nice, but I want to see a little show me. Right. So last thing, because I know you got to run and but there's an issue that I banged my shoe on the table like Khrushchev about for over a year, which is this end of LIBOR that's happening in June and the flip over to SOFR. Now, I know here in the United States, and SOFR, for those of you who don't realize, is the secured overnight financing rate, which is a secured domestic debt indexing rate. And from what I understand, all of the debt in the United States has to be switched over to SOFR by June of 2023. And all new debt issued in the United States post January 1st, 2022 had to be issued index to SOFR, and LIBOR is basically over. But what I saw the other day in a post from somebody, I can't remember where I saw it, but I'll find it and put it in the show notes of the podcast, which is that there's still $220 trillion worth of US dollar denominated offshore debt that's indexed to LIBOR. And part of me kept wondering, like, why is the Eurodollar futures markets keep signaling June as the big thing, right? And then you've got Yellen and everybody wanting to fight over the debt ceiling in June.
Yep.
And there's a bunch of stuff happening around, the British are now screaming about maybe pulling out a digital CBDC pound in May. Like, all of these things are happening all at the same time. And when I see a whole bunch of these things come together all at one time, I'm like, the spidey sense goes off. But I'd like you to talk, if you could, what do you think about the disconnect now that creates this disconnect between LIBOR and SOFR? Do you think that's a real thing? Because to me, I think it's real, but I'd like you to expound on it if you could.
So at the Bond Freak, Randy Woodward, great guy. He follows a lot of this. He's in the trenches. And so I'm learning from him when it comes to this particular issue. And the pushback against SOFR has just been of a magnitude. And I think it really has to do with repricing risk at this point,
yes,
which is a very real thing. Yeah. So, I can't say whether or not there might end up being this residual large chunk, as you pointed out, because this is only something that pertains to the United States markets. So it's conceivable to me that you end up with this shadow LIBOR market,
right?
Because
but how do they price their assets at that point? How do they deal with it? And there's another issue here, which is that a lot of that.
Well, they were pricing their own LIBOR forever.
Agreed, but there comes a point where if they want to switch the banking system, the global banking system, away from commercial banks, because that's clearly what when I look at the European system, it's very clear that there's a push to end commercial banking as a thing and to move to a central banking model, right? That's what the Klaus Schwab and all those guys are talking about. Now, whether or not they're going to pull it off or not, whether or not they have the power to pull it off, I don't think they do. But I think that they're going to.
But I'm not saying in their defense, but
right.
I'm just making an observation that, and it's actually introduced risk to the European system. They have moved to capital markets. Some, like me, would argue they've moved to the capital markets too quickly and too recklessly, because you've got all these CLOs and private equity, and all of this stuff is being priced in a very young market in very big numbers, because they're trying to get away from the aftermath of the global financial crisis, when they were purely on a banking system that's still not been cleaned up. Let's get real.
No, it hasn't been cleaned up. And something to remind everybody about, something I heard, I heard this, and maybe you can corroborate it for me, which is that, here in Europe, they do almost all business expansion is financed directly through bank debt. But here in the United States, we issue corporate debt, and which is a fundamental disconnect. So if the banking system in Europe catches a cold, if there's a LIBOR crisis, because during COVID, LIBOR blew out, but SOFR didn't move. And this is that disconnect that I've been talking about, that I'm like, we no longer have to worry about if Europe gets a cold, then the Eurodollar inversion forcing the Fed back to the zero bound. Right? Okay. I'm not okay. I've been wanting to talk to somebody who knows anything about this stuff. I've been saying this in a vacuum for over a year, and it seemed logical to me.
Again, that's why you see on Powell's face a lack of fear. We are cognizant of being a good global neighbor, but we still have to make policy for the United States. But he's got more levers and more latitude to do that than Bernanke did in 2008 and 9.
Well, again, you go back to what you said at the beginning of this, which is that the transmission system for monetary policy has fundamentally changed. It has, but over his dead body, are we going to get a central bank digital currency? No, that's not what I was getting at. I wasn't going there at all. I was just saying that he has a big stock of treasuries on his balance sheet that he can supply the market with through QT. And he's got a big chunk of change in the reverse repo facility. So whatever the market needs, does it need collateral? Does it need liquidity? It can give, he can be Santa Claus and provide both to the domestic markets. The Eurodollar markets, they go fuck themselves. No offense. So as far as I'm concerned, like I again, Austro-libertarian, all I see is the rise of I look at it as the USSR, and I'm like, I have no use for it. And to me, it all seems like this is a perfect script being laid out here. They're an unelected Politburo in Europe. They don't, there's no accountability to national governments. There's almost no accountability to national governments. They run roughshod over national governments. And I just have I have no use for the European Union. I think it's one of those things that I would love to see pushed to the dustbin of history. And I'd like to see the United States survive this, because I still think we have the most dynamic and best capital markets and best legal structure for private.
I'm right there on the United States, and right. If China is as weakened as I think it is, then there's a good chance that Europe has got its allegiances out of alignment.
Oh, most definitely post haste Ricky Ticky. So, all right, Danielle, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll hopefully we could do this again some other time. And sure. Oh, great! And I was really hoping for that. So I appreciate your time and everything that you do. And if there's anything you'd like to say on your way out the door, I'll leave you with the last word.
Come to dimartino.substack.com. Subscribe to Quill. We put out amazing, independent, agenda-free research every day, and our clients absolutely love us for it. So that's my plug, because it's how I pay my bills. So I'd love to have your listeners be my new subscribers.
And same here. So I do appreciate your time and your diligence and your energy on this, because it's a breath of fresh air when I see you in the mainstream financial press just
speaking the truth
bombs. Yeah, yes. Telling the truth. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, all right, Danielle, you take care. You have a great day now. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Well, that'll about wrap it up for episode 133 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can follow me on the blog at tomluongo.me. And of course, you can sign up for the Patreon at patreon.com/Gold, Goats, and Guns, where we do twice weekly video market reports going over the technical state of various strategically important markets like gold, oil, silver, Bitcoin, the Dow, and the Eurodollar futures market, as well as private blog posts and the monthly Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter, where we have a bespoke portfolio trying to help you make sense of a world going mad in these kind of treacherous investing times. So, with that said, we'll be back soon. You guys take care and keep your stick on the ice.